Is my mic working? Good. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to kick off this second day. And as Monica already said, today we will be actually focusing a little bit more on what is ahead of us with all these topics regarding urban climate adaptation. And this session is about vegetation in this whole context. And this session will actually be guided by the three of us, and I will quickly introduce us. So my name is Sanda Lenzholzer. I'm from Wageningen University. I'm the coordinator of the Soloclim project, and I'm tutoring together with very valued other colleagues our two young researchers, Maricruz and Jan, and maybe you want to introduce yourselves as well.
Good morning. I am actually ESR1. I am focusing in micro scale in vegetation. My background is as an architect, and I have a master in sustainable architecture. Have worked in the past in architecture, but now I'm more interested in seeing how can we focus in improving our microclimate.
Thank you, Maricruz. And my name is Han, and I'm now because it's an industrial PhD, so I belong to Wageningen University and also Fostering Partners, and I'm now working on the larger scale vegetation cooling interventions. So I have a background in urban forestry, and now I want to know how to arrange the vegetation in the neighborhood scale that can have the optimal thermal comfort. And yeah, so glad to see you today. And maybe, so the next step is ask our speakers to introduce themselves.
No, I will just quickly give also an overview of how we will structure our discussion today. So basically, we had very interesting discussions yesterday already, and new questions arose. And Jehan, Maricruz, and we have been sitting together, and we shaped a lot of questions that we would like to ask all you specialists, because I think we can actually pick up a lot of knowledge and perhaps also a lot of new insights and methodologies for the future. So this session is really, we're trying to tap your brains and of course each other's brains in order to see where we are heading towards. And we will try to structure the discussion in such a way that we first start like, what are the new insights, the new methodologies to understand working towards urban climate solutions. Then some questions about new solutions themselves. And then also a very important part, and I think our partners who work like in the public sector can talk a lot about it, how to implement all these solutions, because that is almost a field of research by itself. And I see people nodding, so I'm happy that we came up with these questions. So there's a lot that we will have to talk about. And so this is the structure of our discussion this morning. And again, I'm very, very happy, and we are so honored that you're all with us, that you take the time and join our community. But of course, before we go into the discussions, we would really like to give all our very valued and experienced discussants the floor. We have some of our keynote speakers from yesterday joining us, but since we have perhaps a slightly different community taking a look at today's program, I would like to ask them as well to again introduce themselves quickly. And as Ivana had communicated, we have per person like 5 minutes for that. And if you just want to have a little talk about yourself, it's fine. If you want to show a little PowerPoint or a video or something, that's fine as well. So I think I will just start in the sequence of people one more thing. I have to excuse Professor Dr. Nicole Pfoser. she got the rare opportunity to get her second vaccination, and she had to excuse herself. So I think we all understand that she is not with us this morning, but well. But let me just go in the order of sequence of people that I have in front of me. So there's no hierarchy, it's just pure coincidence. On my panel, I have Gerald in front of me. Gerald, would you like to introduce you and your work in 5 minutes, please?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gerald Mills. I'm a physical geographer. I'm in the School of Geography at University College Dublin in Ireland. My interests for most of my career have always been in the city, and particularly in urban climates. So biographically speaking, I am Irish. I went to America to do my PhD, and then I worked for a number of years in America before I returned here. All my work is mostly based upon the climates of cities. And I sort of shifted. So initially I was most interested in modeling with regard to microscale climates, streets, etc. And I shifted increasingly in the period since 2000 toward issues associated with communicating urban climate science to the broader community. I'm a co-author of a book called Urban Climates, which is essentially a modern synthesis of the field. And it's effectively the first one that was been completed in English. What else can I say? Oh, I was formerly president of the International Association for Urban Climates. So I'm very much involved in urban climate science and its development. In relation specifically to the issues under discussion here, I've spent close to a decade putting together a tree database for the city of Dublin that I couple with that I'm starting to couple with information about buildings and with the atmosphere. And the things that interest me right now is essentially that space, given that we spend about 70% of our time inside buildings, and a good proportion of our time outside buildings is about making the spaces going back and forth as comfortable as possible. I'm also interested in issues of fairness in the city, because you generally tend to find that poor people occupy poor places. That means they occupy poor buildings, but they also tend to get poor infrastructure, including poor green infrastructure. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Gerald. Then I move to Cecil. Please introduce yourself. Perhaps you have a video to show or just a talk, whatever you like.
Just a talk, but I have a nice picture in the background, Sanda, at least of the Collserola Park here in Barcelona. So many greetings, and I'm really glad to be part of this fantastic event and distinguished panel. And my name is Cecil Konijnendijk. I'm Dutch originally, graduated from Wageningen University a while back, but I'm now based in Barcelona, where I co-run something called the Nature-Based Solutions Institute. And what we really do is we provide advice to governments at different levels, local, regional, national, as well as global, on the implementation of nature-based solutions with a strong focus, I would say, on trees and urban forests. So it's very nice to hear already that we have a colleague who has a good urban forestry background as well on the panel. I'm also a professor of urban forestry at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, where I also run a program called the Master of Urban Forestry Leadership, where we train green leaders who should help us implement some of these nature-based solutions that we, as we know, are emerging, but also are sometimes challenging to put into practice. So I'm really looking forward to discussing that. So of course, we know that during recent years, a lot of good research has come out about especially the role of trees and green spaces in cities, the potential contributions to climate change adaptation, but also things like public health, of course. And during this current COVID pandemic, it's become, again, very obvious that green spaces, local green spaces, play an extremely important role for our mental and physical health and well-being. In some cases, the use of urban parks has gone up 70%. A very interesting trend is actually there that a lot of the users are actually new users, so people who did not go to the parks before, which is really pretty interesting. And of course, also biodiversity is another big agenda globally that actually green spaces connect to very well. So the research shows, for example, that the 30% canopy cover in neighborhoods is really a threshold for promoting people's health and well-being. Some really recent research from Australia shows that both mental health and general health are improving dramatically when you hit that 30% boundary. In terms of climate change adaptation, actually, you should almost have 40% or more, where you start seeing significant cooling effects. And of course, then we also know that the distance to the nearest local green space is very important for people's health and well-being. If you live within 300 meters, maybe 500 meters of the nearest park, you're actually much more inclined to use that park more regularly. And from there, of course, also get a lot of benefits. And then finally, we also know actually that the visibility of green, so the green you can see from your window, from your home, your work, the places where you go to school, is actually very important as well. And there's still limited research on that, just the visual aspect of green. But again, for mental well-being, for creativity, the visible green is very important. So sometimes I talk about 3 types of green. Yeah, you have the destination green, the parks, and so where you go to do activities of different forms, to meet other people. You have the kind of enveloping greens, the green you have around you, the canopy green in your neighborhood. And then part of that basically is also the visible green, so the green you can actually see from the places where you live, work, and play. And I've used that recently, a few months ago, in kind of formulating a very simple guideline for promoting urban greening, urban forestry in cities, which is called the 330-300 rule. So starting with the 300, everybody should live within 300 meters of a good green space, a public green space. It could be green space of different sizes and forms. It could be a green avenue, could be a park, could be a playground, etc. It should be a 30% canopy cover in your neighborhood for those reasons that I gave you earlier. And we're not talking about 30% for the city as a whole. We're talking about 30% at the neighborhood level. And finally, everybody should be able to see 3 trees at least from their window. And that then has to do, of course, with this idea of visible green and the need to have green always near you. And I think during COVID, and these will be my final words, we of course all experienced it in our home working places, just that opportunity to just look out of the window, look at a tree, look at green spaces can often make a tremendous impact in terms of just keeping ourselves sane, providing some inspiration, some break, some creativity. So I'm looking forward to the discussion in the panel, and thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you, Cecil, for this short introduction and also bringing up your 330-300 guideline. We might talk also about the nature of guidelines later, seeing where the discussion goes. And actually it very much reminds me also of a saying by Bertolt Brecht that is almost 100 years old, that every citizen is entitled to have a tree in front of his window. So but it's often important to reiterate these things and bring it back to the attention, and I think you do a good job in this. I would like to go to Wiebke. Wiebke, we cannot see and hear you yet, but yes, there you are. Good morning. Welcome. Hello.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel and this event. I prepared a few slides to introduce myself and the job I'm doing right now as a senior policy advisor in the municipality of The Hague. Let's try to quickly share my screen with you. Oh, I see that the host disabled participants sharing the screen.
Oh, it's happening.
Is this something that can changed easily? Yeah, okay.
Yes, now you can.
Oh, yes, great. If it's okay, you can see my screen.
Yes, it's coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah, good, it's there.
Okay.
I see the turf marked. Or?
Yes, yes, right. City center of The Hague, you see high-rise buildings, and you see the green, the importance of green. Who I am, I'm a landscape architect with passion for designing, creative thinking, collaborating and connecting people and ideas in the field of green, climate responsive urban spaces. And due to my background in different fields of urban planning and landscape architecture, I combine different perspectives of the field. So I try to moderate between and link design thinking, the research, but also the policy domain. yeah, that's basically because of my experience as a designer in urban in urban planning and landscape architecture office, but also my work as a PhD student together with Sanda, Lenzholzer and colleagues from Wageningen and the AMS Institute in Amsterdam on urban green infrastructure and living labs. Yeah, and finally, since 3 years, I'm working as a policy advisor in the municipality of The Hague. You see it in the background as well. I made the step to join practice again because I wanted to bring the knowledge that I made up in academia back to, into practice again. And since 2 years, I'm also a member of the Spatial Development Advisory Committee of the province of North Holland. And I also try to include the topics of urban climate adaptation in this context. Some of you might know the PhD research I did a few years ago, in which I developed design guidelines for for climate responsive urban green, clever and cool. Since 2018, I've been giving a lot of lectures, informing people and sharing the knowledge and also starting the discussion. And I found that I noticed that it was a really ongoing process, and I was actually surprised how often and again this information is needed, and how positively people reacted on one hand the quantitative information, and other side the specific guidelines and ideas how they can implement it in their daily work. And what do I do right now in The Hague? On one hand, I'm working on the long-term thinking of climate adaptation, in which, of course, green is just one of the parts that is included in this topic. In the beginning of this year, we published our first climate adaptation strategy, including a step-by-step approach on how our colleagues and also external designers can include climate adaptation thinking in their designs and plans. One of the principles also is to use green as much as possible and do not use hard materials. I can tell you much more about it, but I just quickly want to go through. Furthermore, we also try to teach our colleagues, landscape architects and urban planners in climate responsive thinking. For example, in a nice research through design project we had last year and until the beginning of this year, together with design experts from the ministry. And here we collaborated with GreenPass using EnviMet, also to investigate the impact of different design scenarios on thermal comfort. And we used this to improve our designs. And it was a very interesting process also, because it was the first time, it was used here in The Hague, this tool of EnviMet. And of course, it's good discussion to think of, do we need this kind of tools in our daily processes in the municipality? And finally, I would like shortly to show you a design or actually a specific project which will be opened by the end of this month. The Conflict Park. It is a renovation project of the municipality, in which we include a lot of green, but in which we also include a new system, an urban water buffer that is located deep under the ground and which stores rainwater locally, which can be reused during dry and hot periods for the vegetation in the park and the farm. And this was a very specific project which also helped to make climate adaptation tangible in our municipality. And of course, it was said before by other speakers, we do not specifically look into climate adaptation, but see it as a broader, see the broader picture and see the many benefits that urban green infrastructure provide to the people. And finally, I have 3 short observations that I may help to start a discussion. So in terms of policy and financing, I think I experienced that climate adaptation really needs to be tangible and linked to topics such as livability and health. So project really helped to get it on the agenda and make also policy advisors and decision makers understand what climate adaptation means. The next is, I believe that specific quantitative and qualitative requirements are needed in the beginning of development processes, but also we need to guarantee that they are controlled during the whole process and monitored in the end, in order to include green with all the different benefits I just showed in our newly developments, but also, of course, in the redesigns and refitting projects in the city. And finally, what I noticed on the level of design of landscape architects is that we think that it's very easy for a landscape architect to use the design guidelines, also the ones I developed, but actually to include this new knowledge, it's really needed to consciously rethink the design. So not do the things as we did them usually, especially professionals that have longer experience. We really need them to help think of different ways how to work with green and blue, because that's what they have done always in their whole experience. But now we need to think about how we can shape it in a different way and make it even more climate responsive. So I'm very happy to discuss those points and others together with the panelists later on. And once more, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Wiebke. Very interesting starting points. I see Johan and Marie-Cruz nodding like, yeah, this sounds almost like some answers to the questions that we wrote down yesterday. So I think it matches very well. Yeah, thank you for this quick introduction. May I ask the next lady on the panel, Marjolein, to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sanda, and also thank you for having me as well. Yes, my name is Marilyn Pipersvones. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Urbanism at the Delft University of Technology. I was educated as an urbanist. I also did my PhDs at the same faculty, my postdoc, and now I'm still there. So I always describe myself a bit as a furniture of the department, but well, I'm having fun there. What I do basically, or what I'm interested in, is how urban design shapes urban climates and how we can actively connect with the climate, shape the climate. There are currently 2 projects that I'm involved in that I think are relevant for today's panel. The first one is the Climate Arboreta, where we try to assess the cooling performance of different tree species with regards to air temperature, surface temperature, and thermal comfort. So at the forecourt of our faculty, we have 75 different species of trees, which we categorized according to a tree architecture typology based on crown proportions, crown shape, branching structure, and foliage density and other foliage characteristics. So we basically have 5 main clusters, and then we have sub-clusters, and then eventually we have loads of different trees. So we're testing 75, which is, well, logistically speaking, quite a challenge. So if we're talking about methods, that's something that we might talk about later. We've quite a lot of different instruments which we employ there. The other project that is interesting to mention is the new Van Leeuwenhoek Park, which will be constructed in the center of Delft on top of the new train tunnel that has been there now for a few years. It's a very long and narrow park that will be there. And what is special about it is that the mitigation of heat stress was one of the requirements already from the beginning. So they asked me to be involved in writing the brief for the statement of requirements. I was involved in the tendering process. I helped the designers a bit. I modeled also in NVMet, so like Wiebke did for The Hague. And on the base of which there were some alterations made to the design. And the final step that we want to do now is monitor. And there we're making, together with colleagues from other faculties and the Science Center, custom-made weather stations. So that's an innovation in itself, where we would like to see, well, for years, how this park is performing, to also be able to improve our models. And what's also nice about this last project, indeed, is what you were talking about before, is how do we actually implement these measures? What resonates with designers? What resonates with the city? What are difficulties? What we think might be a good idea as climate scientists might not well speak to people in practice. So there's also, I think, a lot to gain. Yeah, so that was my short introduction, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Marilyn. Then we switch over to another colleague from TU Delft, Mark Ottelet. I'm very happy to have you here and to meet you. It didn't happen before that we met in person in the Netherlands, which is a pity, but I hope that we can have more meetings in the future, because you also work on green facades. Well, I give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you very much for your introduction. And well, I'm happy to meet you in person as well. And well, due to the corona, we cannot physically have this congress or this symposium. So that's also a pity again. But online we can also join, and I'm happy actually that I can contribute to this event. Yes, I am working in the field of green facades, green roofs, and I call that the green building envelope. Actually, that's my specialism, and I'm working at the Delft University of Technology for I think several years now as an assistant professor in the sustainability group at the Faculty of Civil Engineering. Well, I'm guiding actually several PhD candidates working in the field of green facades, green infrastructure. Think about modeling on urban heat mitigation aspects, but also on fine dust capillation, which is also very important from the respect of air quality. Actually, I'm also specialized in what I call bioreceptive materials. So I introduced also a sort of new green facade type, and it's actually an autonomous green facade system. So it's not a living wall system, a modern living wall system, which is called also a hydroponical system. It needs nutrients. Actually, I adapted concrete in such a way that mosses can grow on top of it, and that it can also bring an extra added value to the environment. And so we are building a lot in concrete structures. That's also common in civil engineering structures. And actually, I would like to think in such a way that we can adapt our building materials, which it can add an added value to the environment and for the people that are living in the surrounding. Actually, that is the work that I am doing, and I'm looking forward to contribute to this session. And yeah, well, if you have any questions about green facades or green roofs, also for the PhD candidates, then I'm open for it to contribute in particularly that area.
Thank you, Mark. That is the perfect transition. Because we actually wanted to start talking about this. So we will dive into, let's say, our first cluster of questions or topics to be discussed, which is mostly about, let's say, the new science, new methods, etc. Before we then go into the solutions and into the implementations part. And I would like to pass, the mic, or let's say our question list, to Marie-Cruz, who shaped this question for you, but also, of course, for the other colleagues. But I think it's very much geared towards you, and you just built the bridge. So please go ahead.
Yes, well, now that you mentioned about the green facades that you have worked in the past, I was very interested in knowing which methodology have you used to develop these new designs for green walls?
In which sense do you mean the methodology?
Well, I will say as an example, I'm using research through design in order to develop my green wall facade. I don't know how have you structured your researches?
Yeah. Well, I did it on another methodology way, as you said. So actually, I started with well, in our faculty, civil engineering, quantification plays a very important aspect. And as a civil engineer, because I'm educated as a civil engineer, actually I would like to quantify what is the contribution, the real contribution of vegetation. And actually that was my starting point, my driving point when I started, and actually when I got the chance to do a PhD in the field of green infrastructure. And from that point forward, actually I'm starting with experiments to quantify really the contribution of vegetation on the built environment, either outdoor, but also on the indoor climate. So think on relative humidity, think on temperature aspects, think on hard data that we try to quantify. Also the air pollution. What is the real contribution of green facades on capturing of fine dust particles? So I developed a method, a counting method under the electron microscope to quantify really with hard data, what is actually the potential of such systems on the environment. And that was actually my driven methodology. And yeah, of course, there are different methodologies to investigate such an area. And I think that is also, I think the most valuing to this area, that it's, well, you have to edit from several perspectives.
Thank you, that was very clear. I don't know if the rest would like to contribute and say which methodology have you used in the past, and which ones would you suggest that will help us in the future?
Well, actually, I would like to say something more, because actually also the economical benefit, that's also very important, because in the past, and that was already, I think, 10 years ago, all the main contractors say, yeah, but okay, I have to invest in such a greenery, it costs a lot of money, and actually, which problem am I solving? Is it for the environment? Is it for the building owner? Who has to pay the costs for it? So I think also the economical benefits, in a broader sense, it's also for think about mitigating of ecosystem functionalities and so on, should be quantified in such a way that it's also from an economical point of view, people must convince that green is a very good solution inside cities.
Thank you very. I mean, we are recording this whole event, so I mean, everything you guys are saying, I think, is extremely valuable for the community, also for the young researchers. So I mean, when I hear this, I would like to write down everything, but I'm like, wow, luckily we record this. So yes, it's hugely interesting, and you have been touching upon a topic already, about all these criteria we have to take into account. And I would like to pass the mic to Jehan, to a question that she shaped, let's say, in a little bit more broader sense regarding green infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Sanda, and thank you, Mark, for your very inspiring talk. So, yeah, so like currently what I'm doing my PhD, I want to design, to come up with the design guidelines that the main goal is for the thermal comfort. So we want to make like what can did before. It's like cooling green green infrastructure design guidelines. So the main goal or the main criteria, okay, it's the urban climate. But also, we also need to consider other criteria like Mark mentioned before, the economy and also the air pollution. So I'm just wondering, like in your practice experience, how do you decide the criteria, the order of the criteria to make the whole process into the practice? So like now, yeah, maybe too much, but the first, like I'm thinking now is, okay, the cooling effects, and then maybe consider the aesthetics inside, the cost of and maintenance. So like in the real project experience, how do you balance, or how do you think of the order of these criteria? That is my question, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's basically two questions. Perhaps we should first try to bring together all the criteria that might be important. And I think you can all contribute from your broad and long experience. And then we can also think about how to prioritize, because that is very important in implementation, but also in the research. When we do research through design, where we generate design options, and then we test them, we need to see what are we testing in what part of the design process and what is getting priority. So, you know, these are very, very important decisions to take in terms of the methodology. So I suggest, because the panel is not that big, that you just, let's say, open your mics and just speak out freely, because I think it's not necessary that you raise your hands and I say, yeah, please here. We are small enough of a community to just, you know, speak. So I just give the floor to you guys, and I think we'll manage that way.
Great. It's a really good question. And I think, Sanda, making the difference between science and practice is also very valid. When you decide in science what to do, it has to be meticulous. So the method you choose and the priorities you make are all related to your main research question, your sub-questions. What is it exactly that you want to find out? And you have a really clear storyline that everything fits together, and you've got, usually you've got quite some time to get it right. In practice, things are sometimes a bit less predictable, and then defining criteria is something that you do together with a lot more people who also have different interests. So I would say that it really depends on the project and who is involved in the project, when some aspects get priorities or don't. So although we as scientists might feel that a priority would be the same for all projects, you will see that in different projects they are not, because of the different people, because of the different location, because of the different, of course, climate or climate adaptation or livability or vegetation is just one aspect of an urban design, which makes it so complex. So I think, yeah, that would be my answer, that in practice, it's really important to keep on communicating from the beginning on with whomever is involved or should be involved. And then I think you will get your priorities right, or at least the best for everyone who's involved. But I think probably Wiebke can say a lot more about this.
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. I think you're completely right. I think the question, as it was asked, is that seems very clear and easy. How do you prioritize? It seems that everything is nicely organized next to each other, and we give points and we easily make a very clear evaluation. But the reality is much more complex. It's not only that very much different partners participate. We do have the politics, and we do have different, unfortunately, different departments, different finances. So it's much more complex. But still, we are working on setting up basics. What I said before, kind of requirements, in order to kind of create a step-by-step approach, so that in all the different projects where partners start, and exactly as Marilyn said, it's very much depending on who started the project, who's the project leader, who does this person know. But if all the project leaders have kind of an overview of different aspects they need to include in their projects, then they can specifically ask people to join their project group, and they have kind of a structure which they can follow. And here in The Hague, yeah, of course, climate adaptation is just one of the big topics that falls beyond a sustainable living environment. It's also energy transition, sustainable mobility, circularity, and we now try to start to, for each of the topics, and green as well, of course, in general, try to bring together the knowledge. So we are not as far as already having kind of a method how to prioritize between the different aspects, but we start with making an overview of including all the different important topics that are included in our policy documents already, and which project leaders need to use and to include in their from the beginning of the project, to have at least thought of every project and then have the same starting point.
If I may jump in there, I think these are some really important points, right? And I think, Jahan, this is a really key question. Like, how do you define some kind of criteria set that can be used? And some of it will be more generic, and some of it will have to be, of course, very much more context dependent. So say in urban forestry, we often use, let's say, 4 questions, right? We say the right reason. So why are we putting in trees, right? And in this case, there could be a climate perspective, but of course, it will often be multiple reasons. Then it's the right place. So where do you put in the vegetation? Where do you put the trees? The right tree. So what tree is appropriate? And of course, all of these questions sound very simple, but they're very complex, because the right tree can depend on many factors. Think about climate change, think about the fact that the city, of course, is not a natural growing environment. And then finally, a question that I think we often ignore is the right care. So when the tree goes in, right, and that's something that both designers and managers are often to blame for. We have kind of an image in mind, but of course that tree will develop, will grow over time, will be healthy or not healthy, which also has an impact on the benefits it provides, obviously. And then, of course, the whole complexity around it of how trees in urban environments actually interact. We have often been treating trees, especially along streets and on squares, as individuals with no connections to other beings or other vegetation. But of course, recent research that comes out that says actually that trees communicate in many different complex ways and form systems, interact like social beings. That is kind of knowledge we have to bring into that equation as well. And Suzanne Samart at UBC, of course, has been doing some really interesting work on that. So we have to get away from the kind of box mentality, I think, of looking at a very engineered system, which of course we need engineering, right? It's obvious, but also to try to bring in nature-based thinking. So to try to think as much as possible, how can we actually mobilize nature's own power and ecological processes to actually get to some of those benefits that we want to achieve? Because it means we don't have to always work against the system, but we can work with the system. So I think in the whole criteria mindset, I think it's like an overarching idea that we really have to adapt a much more nature-based thinking approach, not just nature-based solutions, which is very anthropocentric, but also try to think about nature's own place in this. And we know from experience and from many projects that there's a lot to be gained if we give more space to natural processes.
I would just add that I think I think scale is absolutely critical to how all these decisions are laid out. So the decisions you make at an urban scale, which might be, for example, dominated by things like the river systems, the hydrological systems, protecting them, and have linear parks along that basic fundamental catchment unit, might be completely different from what I'd often describe as some form of climate rehabilitation, identifying places that are actually problematic, and then you're designing specifically to offset urban issues that have arisen, a sort of crisis management thing. I'd also say that my experience in talking to citizens, community groups are pushing for greening. For example, climate change hardly ever comes up as a reason as to why they want to plant trees. But if I talk to city people, climate change is the only thing they talk about with regard to planting trees. So I think scale is absolutely central to how you determine what is the appropriate order in which various options are placed.
Gerald, Mark, do you have some criteria you think we have forgotten so far, or?
No, well, actually not. I think that all our predecessors said already the good things, and also what Gerald says. I think the skill is very important, and in the skill, for me, also the government steps in. So then you can act.
Muted yourself.
I'm muted again. Sorry. Yeah. And so from the different skill, I think you can work local as a citizen, but also the government has to step in on the larger scale to set up guidelines, how to create cities in a new sense. With facing climate change, we are also dealing with social problems. Think about water on the street, it's climate change. So, well, we have to redesign our cities, and well, we cannot do that. Well, we have to collaborate. So, and well, we have to maybe also think about new guidelines, and it has to be done, to my opinion, from the municipalities, from the government, and then you are really going deeper inside the system, and then you are talking about a single house. But I think guidelines, well, that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. You're building again the bridges. I don't know. It seems like the conversation is really going exactly how we shaped our questions. It's really interesting. So, because our next question would be about guidelines and how specific they should be, because well, also Wiebke knows about this from her PhD research, and especially is also working on guidelines. Marie Cruz is more working on product, a new type of green wall systems. But this question of the guidelines, how specific should they be? Sometimes when I heard you in this discussion now, I thought, you know what, just forget about guidelines. But then on the other hand, you said, Mark, we should have guidelines, and it should be the municipalities offering them. Well, but how do the municipalities get the guidelines? Probably together with the university. So I think it is really a conundrum, and I would like to hear your opinions about that. What shall we do, and what do you think academia can do in this context?
If I may start reflecting.
Oh, sorry, but maybe Wiebke, you can first say something about it.
Yeah, just a short remark. But when I think back of the last years when I present the guidelines, the feedback I often get is that people are very happy with the explanation of my academic research in simple words, so that they understand the principles behind the guidelines. I really wonder, it would be very interesting to analyze the work of landscape architects and find out whether they really apply the guidelines or the principles presented in the guidelines. Because the feedback I get in all the presentations is what people really like, is that they understand the research I did, and I explain it in very simple words, so that they see what is the difference in air temperature between a street with big trees or small trees. So if they understand the principles, and then we link it to design examples, so that they can see how this information can be implemented in a design. This is the feedback I very often get, and in the end, of course, I present the guidelines and I send them around. Of course, I have no clue whatever they do with it. Probably they are in one of the maps on their computers. But I think it's very important to not focus on guidelines on themselves, but on explaining the system behind. Because I think many designers, landscape architects, and urban planners, they are so creative in their way of level thinking, including a lot of the layer thinking. I'm sorry, they need to include this way as well, and this new aspect. And I think if they understand how the system work of shading and sun and radiation, they can find also solutions themselves. Of course, then they need the guidelines, quantitatively saying how much shade is needed, how much green or water space is needed. But I think it's much more important, once more, to focus on the principles.
Thank you for your insights, Wiebke. Please.
I couldn't agree more. I think what you're saying is very valuable, also because every project and every location is different. So I think it's very difficult to make guidelines that apply everywhere. And also because it needs to be integrated with other criteria. So indeed, if you know the basics, you know how it works, then you can combine it with other functions in such a way that you get an integrated solution. So indeed, I agree that understanding the basic principles would be more valuable than just applying guidelines.
Yeah, I can partly agree with it. I think I've moved a bit to the dark side, right? Being an academic, and the question I got most frequently during my career as an academic was, can you provide us guidance? Can you provide us guidelines? How many trees do we need to plant? What is the canopy cover we need? And I've always kind of declined answering it until recently, when I realized the power of a clear guideline, a clear message, maybe not as a truth, but as something that actually raises the debate, sets a minimum standard, and actually starts integrating some of that very good research into very simple terms. So the 330-300 is really a good example of that. Of course, there's a lot to be debated about it. Is it trees, is it vegetation, is context dependent? But the amount of interest that it has evoked is tremendous. And that then is really a vehicle, I think, for implementing all the good work, for example, Wiebke, you've been doing, all the good work on the importance of trees for health, etc. And cities are really craving that, right? They're really eager to not only to have some guidance of what kind of are good minimums, they're really eager also to see what is kind of a minimum provision per neighborhood. So it has to do with environmental justice and equity, etc. And they're also very eager to benchmark. So I think in that sense, of course, guidelines, although they come a little bit from the dark side, I can see the risk with it. They can also be an extremely powerful communication tool, benchmarking tool. So, so in that sense, I'm kind of switched a little bit from not giving any guidelines at all to actually giving very simple guideline, which everybody remember, everybody understands.
I think there's an argument for something much stronger than guidelines, almost like a right to certain types of green spaces within a distance of your home. I don't think it's possible to resolve this without taking into account the private versus the public realm. And as you go closer and closer to the city centre, then the boundary where your home ends and where the public begins is extremely narrow. There's not much opportunity there unless the public takes up the opportunity. So when I see guidelines that are often presented in terms of area-based, and they might be given to a developer, and they create the green space, it matches what I describe as the top-down version of achieving greening, even though it often turns out that the green space they provided is not accessible to the local community. So you have achieved your physical benchmarks, but you still have created a sort of green segregation. So I think the private public, particularly when you get, as I say, into the city centres where the space gets very, very tight, that has to be resolved. Because if I live in a suburb, I don't have to have a great deal of reliance necessarily on the public space because I have my private green space. And that, for me, if I walked around this city during COVID, I have a photograph of a park nearby, one of the few public parks in the area I live in, with a sign outside saying, if you continue to gather in this park and break COVID rules, we'll shut the park. Now, the logic behind choosing a park where people can gather outdoors during the COVID pandemic, I thought was hilarious. But from a public health point of view, they decided it might be a better option to shut the park, to tell people to go back home into buildings, into apartment blocks, than to actually maintain an open space. So this is where I think the fight is, I'm afraid. And I don't always know the guidelines. Too often I see guidelines have enough wiggle room in them that people can achieve the guideline without actually, actually achieving what you hope the purpose would be, which would be to create a more pleasant urban environment for all the inhabitants.
Thank you for this contribution, Gerald. This topic is also on our list when it comes to the implementation part. So I think we will come back to this because this is a hugely interesting, but also, let's say, dangerous topic. And we have to think about it. But Mark wanted to say something in the beginning. So I think you should really take the mic, and then Wiebke, you raised your hand as well, perhaps after that, and then we go to the next topic.
Yeah, but I think we were already said actually essence of everything. And well, I agree with all the other speakers. But I think what I see is a researcher. I think it's our task as academia to show to people what is the real contribution of vegetation and why do you have to implement it? What is the impact of greenery inside cities? But guidelines, I also noticed already that guidelines in the sense of think about maybe simple or dangerous measures. So you can think about if you would like to refurbish your roof, it's not allowed to put a bituminous layer anymore, but you have to implement an extensive or intensive green roof layer. And so then you are contributing to the urban heat island effect. You're also mitigating the runoff to the sewing system. So with a simple measure, you already touch two problematic issues in dense urban areas. So I think guidelines from the municipality or the government could help to implement the fast growing of urban greenery inside cities, the necessity of greenery inside cities. And so, yeah, it's a complex mixture, and well, of course, it's good to have an open discussion about this topic.
Yeah. And we come back to that topic definitely when we go, let's say, to the implementation phase, which we all agreed this is hugely important because we already have a lot of knowledge and we can create a lot of more guidelines, but how to really get it into, let's say, the swamp of real life, that's a different story. Wiebke, did you still want to contribute to this?
Yeah, just a little note, because I think it is good to be aware of the long process of urban planning processes. And I think that in the beginning of those processes, when it's more about planning, urban planning and land use, then it's very important to have the requirements. So I also wonder if we are clear about what we mean when using the terms guidelines and requirements, because what I refer to when I in this process, when we start in the beginning, the planning and urban planning process, then it's more important from my experience to have the requirements and quantitative requirements. And the further you go in the process, up to the landscape design in the end, then it's more the guidelines I developed in my PhD as well, and then it's more about understanding the principles. I think there is this shift, and I think a very good balance is needed between both.
Okay, thank you, Wiebke. I think, yeah, it is indeed an issue how we define the term guidelines. They can, on the one hand, be guidelines that shape the brief for a project, but they can be also a starting point for benchmarking or to set like rules within a municipality that you have to meet at some stage. So it's, yeah, there are many routes for the guidelines. But anyway, we have touched upon that. We would like to go into the next step that is focusing more on, let's say, new solutions when it comes to green infrastructure. And of course, there are many, and we are all very familiar with, you know, everyone praising green infrastructure. And based upon that, Marie-Cruz will ask you a question.
Yes, basically going that there are issues about the idea that green infrastructure is always good, that is not always the case. So if you can please give us some examples of when this happens.
If I can talk about the park, actually not all residents were very happy, especially with the trees. The park is linear, and on one side of the park, the design provides a double row of trees. And the residents already living there, well, not all of them, but quite a large part of them were not happy with those trees, because their arguments were, we cannot see the park because of the trees. And of course, they're going to take my light and sun away. And then as I showed them from the model studies that it will definitely increase their indoor climate in summer because of the shading and the reduced facade temperatures, some of them were like, oh, okay, maybe. But I find it in more projects that people are not always happy with especially trees. They're also afraid of allergens, of leaves falling on their roofs, into their gardens. So even though maybe from a large scale perspective, all people might agree that vegetation and trees are a good idea, there's also sort of a NIMBY effect there, which I don't know yet how to solve it, but it's definitely there in all layers of the population, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think this is a key question, right? And of course, the overall discourse is that green is good, but we know, of course, many examples where it definitely is not good. It could be internal conflicts between ecosystem services or benefits that are actually competing within a green infrastructure. There could be not thinking about future maintenance and management. There's no resources. There could be what Marilyn was saying, that people actually don't want trees. We're doing some work in Birmingham, developing an urban forest master plan right now, and a large part of the population of Birmingham is not really interested in trees. They say, well, we don't really want trees. We have other priorities. And then, of course, the whole environmental justice component, some really good work done here in Barcelona by Isabel Anguilovsky and colleagues that shows that the greening of neighborhoods can lead to tremendous gentrification challenges. And the High Line is another good example in New York, of course, where the original plan was definitely not to push out people from the neighborhood, but these things happen. So there's a famous paper, I think by a group of Australian authors, that asked the question, how green is green enough? So it can be a balance. And although we see the benefits of green and we know it's good for many reasons, and I think Marilyn referred to this earlier, right? It's still to work very closely with local communities and try to understand, like, where are the sensitivities? Where do people see the problems? And how can we try to avoid some of those mistakes, right? If we do things too much top down.
And can you also come up with perhaps some examples where a green infrastructure just for the urban climate topic already is also sort of hampering good urban climate effects? Can you think of, within this topic of certain issues that can occur when we overdo it, for instance, with green urban infrastructure?
Yeah, if I may briefly, it's maybe not within, so it has to do with the climate, right? I've seen many projects in China, in Beijing, where, for example, big stormwater parks have gone in, which are also good for recreation. But actually what happened is that to do this, housing was taken away, so-called illegal housing, that people were living in an area, they had actually built houses, but they didn't have the right residential permits. So it actually means at least you have social displacement for climate adaptation, which of course becomes a very important question from an environmental justice, political perspective, etc. And then I've definitely also seen cases where maybe the focus on trees has become too much in cities, right? So there's too much focus on putting as many trees in as possible, don't really think about other benefits, other types of green spaces, don't think about cultural sensitivities. So, and that you see in cities all over the place, where actually sometimes there's the ideas, the ambitions are good, cooling, and okay, we need as many trees as possible, but then actually you get these adverse effects because, yeah, this is not what people want, and actually it can have then also some negative effects on, for example, biodiversity or other aspects.
And also, you can certainly plant sufficient trees along the streets. There's many streets like this that when it's in full canopy, you've effectively created a room. So unless you control the traffic, then all you've done is create an environment for increasing the concentration of pollutants. And if it happens that the buildings adjacent are actually naturally ventilated, then you've just managed to pollute the adjacent buildings also.
Perhaps Wiebke wants to extend. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I wouldn't blame the trees. The problem is the traffic.
Yeah. But Wiebke has also, I think, reflected on some of these aspects. And the PhD dissertation is not for nothing called Clever and Cool. So perhaps you can also add to this.
Yeah, actually, yeah, of course, the adverse effects are very important. And once more, you need to know the system and the principles behind the working of urban green in order to design it cleverly. The question you raised before was about whether we have specific projects, and I was just thinking of the main square here in The Hague, the Spui, which is right in front of a big cultural building that will be opened soon, the Amara, in the city center. And what I noticed is that there was a very clear, there was a process in which we involved people from the city and inhabitants a lot in order to make the designs. And I noticed that heat was one of, and climate adaptation was one of the topics involved in this process. So I think that in broader representative projects, I think yeah, climate responsive designing already is on the list of criteria and on the list of projects. And I was very happy to see that. And I think that this kind of representative reference images and projects are needed in order to invite other project leaders and other projects also to use this kind of starting points.
We did a model study for the city of Almere for the Floriade, where we saw that, well, this big forest that's there is actually blocking the cooling breezes coming from the lake. So it raises air temperatures, but also definitely it decreases thermal comfort. So you need to be really smart where to place trees under certain circumstances. Probably for the winter situation, it's nice because they block cold winds. But in this instance, we found that the placement of those trees at that location in summer was not such a good idea. Yeah.
So really, I think we have to be very, very careful about bringing across this panacea that especially trees are always good for you. And I don't know, in the past few months especially, I have to keep telling everyone, like, guys, be careful, be careful. People are now getting aware that, you know, there is urban climate, that there is urban heat, etc. And they always think about heat, but they are not necessarily aware enough yet of the ventilation aspect and what role trees play in this. And it's getting quite complicated. So it's, yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, I would like to switch, let's say, to another scale level when it comes to implementing green infrastructure. And that is, yeah, let's say, more on a medium neighborhood scale level. That's the level that Jehan is working on. And she would also like to ask you guys a question on, let's say, the type of green interventions we should take in its shape.
Now, if we're thinking on the larger, we're going to implement or like good example before in Copenhagen, the green from your studies or experience, better green system in the city? Like
sorry, your mic is cutting out, at least it is from me. Your voice is
not working.
We can hear part of what you say, Jehan. Yeah.
Oh. And you will fix it. Okay.
Hope you can hear me now, but okay, great. So what we're talking about in a larger scale, we want to implement a green system. Apart from, for example, the green finger planning in Copenhagen, for example, how to implement green infrastructure, for example, in a linear on the river, or we make it into pocket park. So from your better green system.
Well,
we still only heard parts of what you were saying.
Yeah, because the microphone is still hampering. So.
Okay. Still can't hear it. I don't know. We can hear you. Yes. Yeah. It's strange. Perhaps because yeah, we can hear. We have two rooms also where we have the public here on site, and we can hear Jehan from that room. So it's perhaps there's a little twitch in the internet connection. But do you understand me properly?
Yeah.
Anyway, I will try to just quickly ask the question again, hoping that now it comes through auditively properly. So the question is, like, on a medium scale, on the city, neighborhood scales, what kind of green interventions would you think are more effective when we are using, I mean, we know that these very large parks, they don't have a very big effect on the adjacent areas because yeah, it's more on the fringes. So obviously it's more important to create, let's say, green infrastructure in the cities with smaller perimeters, but, or no, with bigger perimeters, but let's say smaller interventions. So in that sense, we can think of linear systems, or we can think of scattered smaller parks. What do you have any ideas what systems would be more effective? Did you perhaps do studies on it, model it, or what would be your insights?
Yeah, I can kick it off. So there, I really do think that the 330-300 principle, rule, guideline, whatever we call it, can help, right? Because I do see in the research that just bringing trees, green spaces into people's neighborhoods is key. So it's even more important than having, as you say, Sanda, like large scale parks that may be expensive and may be difficult to implement. But the idea of having green around us, having pocket parks, social meeting places at neighborhood level, community gardens, school greening is another one, right? There can be tremendous benefits gained for children's health and development by greening schoolyards. So there's some of these, I think, very specific types of green spaces that actually could potentially give a lot of benefits. Schools is one. I think community garden-like spaces where people can meet as well, where you can build social cohesion. And then I do think really to make sure that people have visible green. So actually people have visual access to green space as well.
I would agree. I do think you should build as much as possible on existing infrastructure, natural infrastructure, such as river systems. It's a terrible pity to see rivers effectively buried and channelized and separated, because I think it's a lost opportunity to connect all aspects of biodiversity. I don't want to live in a park. I like living in cities. I think our goal should be to create as much diversity within a space that I wish to occupy. And that does mean sheer variety of what you described. The thing I spoke about yesterday was about the physical memory of a city never seems to actually, it seems to be stuck in time. So you end up with places that are brownfield sites that might have been industrialized, and then they get redeveloped. And they look exactly the same as they did when they were brownfield sites. They're all hard. We lose the opportunity to actually put in a bit of diversity. And that means that, say, for example, a neighborhood, they do go through demographic transitions. They do grow up. And I think the infrastructure should grow up with them. And that might mean the parks that were for kids to run around and play football, they transform themselves into parks that might be for people walking dogs or for older generations. But there has to be some sort of, well, I'd like to see a fully evolving neighborhood based upon the guidelines that we spoke about previously. And that means diversity, always diversity. I don't mind having a street that's completely barren, so long as there's another street nearby that actually has other varieties in there. Because I have to say, I think the obsession with thermal comfort is extremely limiting. We are fully sentient beings with all these opportunities for smells, noises, for some people actually like it being hot. Some people like it being cold. I like breezes. So I just think we need to build in systems that have the degrees of freedom for people to experience what I think is, a great monument to human endeavor, the creation of these places.
I think it's a very good point indeed to create this diversity of microclimate. I think this is a very important one. And I also agree with Cecile, having the small scale green systems within the city, in the neighborhoods. This is also due to the limited space in cities above and beyond ground, which is a very important factor limiting the development of large green spaces. So I would even think that I think the suggestion also with the schoolyards is a very important one. We started a little research here in The Hague as well, and we found out that most of the schools the basic schools are situated in the very city center, and this is exactly the place where we have the highest temperatures and where we do not have enough green. So now we are trying to figure out whether we can open the schoolyards also to the public and create not only for the children, pretty green schoolyards, but also for the public. And at the same time, it might also be interesting to think of roof spaces to be green spaces for recreation due to the limited space on the ground level next to the pocket bars between the houses.
Yeah, indeed, I agree with the speaker says. So I think diversity, it's a mixture of different types of greenery. So it could be green facades, rooftop gardens, especially also for the social cohesion in that area. If there are limited spaces, so then you have, to my opinion, you have to integrate the green on buildings. If there is no space for a park, but small parks, indeed courtyards could help. So it's a broad palette of different options that should be incorporated.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
And well, I think this topic of diversity, I mean, Maria-Lena is also with us, Maria-Lena Nicolopoulou in the other room. And, you know, this is exactly, as Dutch would say, it's water on her mills. So she might perhaps come back to that topic in the next discussion. Well, let's switch to our next overarching topic, which is about implementation and how we all all this knowledge and all these ideas and solutions really being realized. And we know that this is a very difficult process. And we start again, let's say, with the very small scale, and I give the mic to Mary Cruz.
Yes, in the very small scale, and especially for very dense cities, which would you think is the main reason for green facades not being implemented as much?
Can you ask the question again?
Why green facades are not implemented as much in dense cities, especially?
At the moment, you mean? Yeah. Well, I think it's also I think it's also part of the local citizens. So who's the owner of the building? So that's an important reason. But also think about is it existing buildings or not? So new buildings, existing buildings. Are you talking about refurbishment? Are there opportunities actually to green those facades? Actually, I love, for example, Berlin. Berlin is a nice example of a city where you, everywhere in the city, you will find some creepers on facades. And it's also part of a program that they started in the 80s to implement actually green facades. So it's actually called more or less maybe a heritage from that period. But in dense urban areas, narrow streets, I see still opportunities for those simple climbers actually that you can introduce. Actually, why people are not experimenting with it, maybe that's the right word for it. I don't know. So I think we have to as a researcher, we have to try to convince them that it's well, that's one of the opportunities that you could apply. Yeah? So it's again, as I said, it's a palette of options that you could incorporate. And we see from old dense cities that common ivy is typically one of the creepers that you could find, and it can also have a real contribution. In the past, I monitored a facade in the inner city of Delft, monumental buildings actually, and one of those buildings actually was greened by common ivy, and the building next to it was really directing from the sunlight, and you could really see the difference in absorption of heat in the masonry, but also when I asked actually the owner of the building or the two buildings, said that well, you can really feel the heat inside the building, and there was a difference in temperature. And well, I think you have to convince also people that that this could be a measure. So you can also think about insulating properties or changing the albedo, and that can also be done with green, but also maybe with paint. So there's, well, you have to seek for a certain solution. So I not really can maybe give you the answer that you are seeking for, but yeah, I think you have to stimulate actually the options that that you could incorporate.
Yeah, and I think similar to the trees, we also need to find out what's holding people back. So what are their worries, their fears?
Yeah.
I think we need to know that as well to be able to respond to it.
Yeah, because some people are really afraid of creepers on their masonry. Yeah? So they say, yeah, they're eating my joints out of the masonry, and maybe I get damage and so on and so on. And so yeah, you have to really investigate what could be done for that typically facade. So is it a very old building? Maybe you will incorporate also moisture problems, because when you have a dense foliage in front of the facade, then in particular for old buildings, you can create moisture problems inside buildings. That is not always the case. Sometimes it protects just the facade to moisture problems. So yeah, it's also complex. So it's not that easy.
I may jump on the stimulation aspect that Mark noted. I think this is a very important one, and it's a difference if we talk about the existing city or the new developments. Of course, in the existing city, we need to stimulate and inform people. So in The Hague, for example, we have the year of the green roof this year, in order to provide extra communication and awareness material, but also to highlight that we have a subsidy for green roofs. And what we see then in practice is that, of course, people with higher educations who live in some neighborhoods, those neighborhoods, they have much more green roofs, while the neighborhoods where actually the bigger problems are in terms of urban heat, people live with lower educations, and they have completely other problems than thinking about greening their roofs. So we are very much aware of this, and we need to find ways also to have an equal way of greening and making the city livable. So that was the existing city, and in the city to build new in the new developments. I think it's a matter of time, because up to now, I think many cities have not had these benchmarks and requirements that we were talking about before. And often the process is very long, so it's very, very difficult for the developers to include new green facades when the process has started already. But now cities really more and more have the benchmarks from the very beginning that green facades are needed. So I think in the coming years, we see more and more green, at least I hope, and I really believe that we see more and more green facades and roofs. And I also heard developers saying before in other events that this is what they need. They need those requirements, because if they are not asked in the, what is that called again?
Brief, the design brief.
The design brief, exactly. The different offers are with or without green roofs. And of course, then the cheapest one is chosen without green roofs. But if all have the same benchmarks and starting points, then for them, it's no problem to make it. Just the starting point needs to be good.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I guess it's still also maturity of the industry, the industrial side, right? We're still not so long in the process of developing an industry around this. Of course, there are some big players, but I guess people who go in different niches, who can offer some of the diversity that Mark was talking about. So I think that's also part of the equation, right? To work with industry, a green roof, green facade industry, and make sure that they understand the challenges as well, and can actually offer the solutions that are targeted and adapted to the context.
Yeah, thank you for these insights. I think very valuable for, let's say, the very small scale. And Jehan will focus on a slightly larger scale about implementation or what kind of issues you meet. So I hope the mic works now. So
We're just also interested to know if any obstacles you have found in your experience and at a larger scale that the projects are related to the urban climate. Here.
Maybe you can concretize it a little bit more, like what kind of green infrastructure you mean?
Yeah, for example, if you want to implement small parks in the neighborhoods, then maybe there are some like some objections from the neighborhoods, from the residents. So similar to this, if you want to implement green infrastructure at a larger scale, so any obstacles that you have met?
I'm not sure this quite fits the answer. I was involved at a co-creation, what they refer to as co-creation project. In other words, it was not driven by the planning authorities. It's driven by the residents in an area that was working class, mostly. And they were trying to address issues associated with housing and greening, and they wanted it greener. And there, the obstacles came from the planning authorities, not from the citizens. So they would have ideas. Those ideas wouldn't be acceptable because of consequences for budgets, maintenance, and things like this. So the typical way by which certainly this city does its job is it brings in experts. The experts basically design the place, and then the citizens have to object. The idea behind this project was it would just happen exactly the opposite direction. And of course, it was the council that would object, not the citizens. So I don't know if that's quite what you mean, but you do get, it's not always the case that the objections are on one side.
Yeah, and another big problem I can see from the urban forestry perspective, right, is that the managers, those people who have to take care of the new green infrastructure, for example, tree planting, they're often concerned about the extra work involved. So the longer term management, there's often no additional budget coming with it. We're still very bad in setting aside capital investment for management, future management of the green infrastructure. So there's often the fear that, okay, this is just adding to the workload. And of course, the worst thing that can happen is you put in trees and they die, right? That's really completely the bad image you give. So I think that's another barrier, right? The kind of connection between implementation, design, implementation, and then the management on the longer term.
And I think that's a very valid point. I think an idea would be that if there's a design brief and you ask architects or landscape architects or urban designers to make a plan, that you would also ask them for, well, an estimate of what kind of maintenance it would take, what it would cost, because that often comes only at the end. And then everybody's super happy about the plan, and then the city comes back and says, I don't think we can pay for the maintenance. So I think if we would only take that up from the beginning in the plan, that would really help. Other points of worries that sometimes, or just impossibilities that come up, at least here in the Netherlands, is that there's so much underground infrastructure that it's sometimes very hard to add vegetation, even though it looks like there's a lot of space. If you start to look in the underground, there's all kinds of cables and pipes that make it very, very difficult to plant trees. And that's where loads of very beautiful conceptual plants often, they have to really make it smaller, make it less. And that's where I also see problems often.
I have to say, I think cities have a lost opportunity. There's an enormous amount of green space that's in private gardens in institutions. I'm always amazed by this. And I think the city councils often feel that they're always under siege because it's up to them to do certain things. It would be much nicer to have a genuine sort of shared space philosophy to these things, because I think certainly when I look at, say, maps of parts of cities I know, you could easily string together sets of gardens to make corridors. They're extremely diverse. They often have, I mean, a lot of the stuff that gets planted on the streets tends to be the same tree all the time again. And sometimes you see what they often refer to as hipster trees arriving in a neighborhood for a period of time because they're just cool. And a lot of the capacity in the system is actually hiding from us. And those instances, I mean, if you look at, say, how cities were, like this city was constructed, and how they lost all the green space, it often was because of the car again, and people turned what were green space in front of the house into driveways, and basically converted landscape that was permeable into impermeable. So they have no incentive to actually maintain or keep that stuff. I often think that in the same vein that there's a rural environmental protection scheme in Europe where a farmer is basically prepared to set aside land to serve a particular purpose, there's a very good argument to be made for residents to maintain their garden in certain ways, maybe some sort of a tax write-off or whatever, but to maintain neighborhoods as potentially linear pathways to maintain biodiversity, hydrological services, and provide levels of comfort in spaces they actually control.
Oh, thank you all for the contributions with this regard. What kind of challenges are we meeting on this slightly larger scale? And of course, this topic of public and private space is really something that's quite difficult, and there are very different target groups. I'm of course also taking back of the time. We have 5 minutes left, and we thought that perhaps we have some questions either from the chat or perhaps otherwise from the audience in let's say in our room that is above here, where people are only instantly able to interact, but we can give them the mic. So Vincent, can you perhaps take a look at the chat, or otherwise pass the mic to one of our colleagues up in the other room?
Yes, can you hear me? So I'll read out a question right now. So Philip Jackson has a question. He pointed out the need to think very carefully about how we integrate the insights from the symposium today and yesterday into the real world. And he said that we will need to simplify it, make it easily implementable, and also make it commercially obvious for those who do not have the same level of expertise as we do. So how would we propose to do this extremely rapidly, also given the requirements of the world today?
Yeah, I can briefly kick it off, but I think that's exactly the idea with 330, 300. There's another 10, 20, 30 is another one that many urban foresters know, right? So you should never have more than 10% of trees of the same species, not 20%, no more than 20% of the same genus, not more than 30% of the same family. And that's based on research, obviously, but it becomes a very easy thing for people to remember. And although it can be discussed and debated, it provides some kind of easy, understandable guidance to promote tree diversity, for example. So I think we do need to have these easy messages, and of course it needs to be really backed up and also shown this is a ground for discussion.
I think having consistent data sets that are publicly available is critical, along with tools for people to examine the places they live in, because a lot of people make judgments based upon comparisons. So I think that you can rely on bottom-up politics to achieve many of these things, not necessarily top-down. So if the push comes from below, and I see it in COVID right now, the attitude toward greening parts of the city is completely different now than it was 2 years ago.
I think also working together with practice, so really integrating science and practice might not be the fastest way, but I see it also as a way that we can learn. Science, of course, still also has many questions, and I think working together, we can help practice and practice can help us. I think that's a very valuable research strategy to also help implementation.
Totally, and education. So, and that is also where we as academia can bring in expertise to our new students and well, guide them for practice. That they have also the luggage and the baggage to implement these new techniques, and that's well, I'm happy that I'm working still on the university here, so that I can educate also our new students. And I also noticed that in the past years, also the interest also of the new students grow inside, thinking about sustainable design of cities. And so there's also an interest of our students. And I think that's also motivating me, at least, also to guide them also for the new practice and to implement it.
I also think you could start including questions about the places people occupy on the decadal censuses that every country do. So rather than, because look at the questions most countries ask, they ask about household, about water. There's no question, I mean, they might ask you about health, but so generic that there's no real meaning. Once you start actually asking these questions, I think it does prompt people to think differently. So census gathers information routinely. I don't see any reason why they can't ask questions about the area in which you live in, rather than about the place in which you live in.
The governance perspective, I would like to add 3 points. I think one is to, as soon as possible, develop benchmarks for new developments, and also to educate our colleagues in all the different departments. And the second is, of course, the point Gerald brought in with the relation between public and private. In The Hague, it's 60% public and 40% private. So we really need other people to make the city green and climate responsive. So what we also do is we talk with corporations, housing corporations, with developers and other parties that have large surfaces on and help them to get the topic on top of their priority list and help them with solutions. And last but not least, we have a broad set of activities, but this happens also in all the Netherlands. We also get the message to very easily to the public and to inhabitants. So I think of the NK Tegenwippen. So this is a kind of a, get the green, get the hard surfaces out of your garden and bring in green. It's kind of a big competition going on in the Netherlands. In The Hague, we have 1,000 trees to give away to inhabitants freely this year. So I think the more of this kind of actions also help them to become more and more aware of the positive effects of green infrastructure, which also help them to have this mindset and be more open for greening their own houses and gardens.
Okay, so we are running out a bit of time, but there's one final question from our live audience, Mariana, for Dr. Clem about the water buffer. So Dr. Clem, do you see it being implemented in more places as a part of the network? For example, as a part of green-blue corridors, or in your vision being the municipality of The Hague, is it a very local and specific solution? Or can we mainstream water buffers in cities?
Yes, of course, we want to mainstream water buffers, and we used this first pilot in order to gain new knowledge how to implement a water buffer in public spaces, and also how it works. So we are going to have a good testing phase, and together with the water board and the drinking water authority, we test and monitor in order to find ways how to implement this or similar systems in other places in the city and other cities as well. So it's definitely a starting point, and try to learn and scale up.
Thank you so much. That's all the questions that I have. So back to you, Sanda.
Thank you, Vincent. Well, we have to wrap it up, but actually I think that there's still a lot of huge and interesting questions that we have, like how shall we design cities that are both dense and carbon friendly but also green and cool enough? You know, the big elephant in the room thing, citizen involvement, how can we enhance that? And of course, also the environmental justice issue that Gerald has also touched upon yesterday. I mean, there's still so much to discuss, and well, probably more PhD researchers to do. I could have gone on for another 2 hours at least speaking with you. It has been, for me, a huge honor, and I can also speak on behalf of Jehan and Marie-Cruz. A huge honor to have you, and it has been very enriching. I'm really deeply touched that we had the opportunity to exchange thoughts at this level of intellectual and also practice exchange. It was hugely enriching, and I would really like to thank you for being with us today. And I hope that we can keep you in our Soloclim community. It was a great way of meeting you, and hope to see you sometime again. And of course, we hope you stay tuned for the next discussions as well. But for now, I would really like to thank you very, very much, and a big applause. Well, you won't hear much of it, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you too for having us. It was great.
Yes,
I really
you're
enjoyed
welcome.
the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks a lot.